The ghost map. The heat hit Elena Ríos the moment she stepped out of the air-conditioned rental car, a dry, suffocating blast that smelled of creosote bush and ancient dust. It was the familiar, cruel welcome of La Sombra, Arizona, a town clinging to the harsh beauty of the Sonoran Desert, just 3 miles from the Mexican border. She hadn't been back for 5 years, not since she left for law school in Phoenix, determined to trade the desert's endless silence for the measured noise of the courtroom. Now, the silence was all that was left. Her grandfather, Jesus Ríos, was dead. Jesus had been the town's quiet conscience, a man who ran a struggling cattle ranch and spent his life obsessed with a single, devastating historical wrong: the loss of the Ríos family's ancestral lands, a vast tract of prime desert property seized by the U.S. government in the 1950s under questionable eminent domain laws. Elena drove through the town. La Sombra, the shadow, lived up to its name. The buildings were faded adobe, the windows shuttered against the relentless sun and the unseen threats that drifted across the border at night. There were more border patrol trucks than residents on the single main street. She reached the Ríos homestead, a sprawling, weather-beaten ranch house built a century ago. It was surrounded by a few acres of dusty, but fiercely protected, farmland. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old wood, coffee, and the cloying smell of funeral lilies. Her mother, Anna, a woman whose spirit had been slowly worn down by the sun and worry, hugged Elena tightly. "He waited for you, Mija," Anna whispered, tears welling in her tired eyes. "He wanted you to fix the thing he couldn't fix." "The land, Mama?" Anna just shook her head, avoiding the subject. "The lawyers are coming tomorrow. They want to settle the estate. You are the only one who can talk to them." Later that night, sitting alone in Jesus's study, a small room cluttered with maps, historical documents, and handwritten manifestos on the history of Arizona land fraud, Elena finally opened the old wooden chest Jesus had bequeathed solely to her. It contained nothing of monetary value. A faded photograph of a young Jesus in the 1930s, looking defiant, a stack of brittle, useless deeds, and one single, heavy object wrapped in oilskin. She unwrapped it. It was an antique brass telescope, heavily tarnished, dating back perhaps 100 years. It was beautiful, but useless for a property dispute. Puzzled, Elena lifted the telescope. It was unusually heavy. She noticed a faint seam near the eyepiece. With a twist, the lens housing opened, revealing a hidden compartment inside the brass tube. And inside the compartment lay the real inheritance, a piece of brittle, yellowed animal hide, carefully rolled and tied with twine. She unrolled it gently. It wasn't a standard map. It was a crude, hand-drawn diagram showing the topography of the local desert canyon systems. The Canon de la Serpiente, Serpent Canyon, and, scrawled in faint charcoal, a series of cryptic Spanish phrases and symbols. At the center of the diagram, where the canyon system converged, was a single, bold X marked in dark ink. The first clue, scrawled along the bottom edge, in her grandfather's shaky handwriting, was a date, NOV. 1937. This was the thing he couldn't fix. Not the deeds, but a secret map to something buried within the ancestral land. Suddenly, a loud, heavy knock rattled the front door. Elena quickly rolled the map, hid it back inside the telescope, and closed the chest. Anna was already moving toward the door, her face tense. "Who is it so late?" "It's the desert talking, Mama," Elena murmured, her heart beginning to pound with the familiar rhythm of fear she thought she had escaped years ago. Anna opened the door to reveal 2 men. They were not border patrol, nor local law enforcement. They were too clean, too sharp, wearing expensive desert tactical gear under their button-down shirts, and their eyes were cold. The leader, a man with a scarred, authoritative face and an American accent, spoke first. "Mrs. Ríos? We are from the Southwest Heritage Preservation Group. We heard about your father's passing. We need to discuss the Ríos Ranch property immediately." Elena stepped forward, her lawyer's composure instantly kicking in. "I am Elena Ríos, the executor of the estate. The office is closed. You can contact my attorney in Phoenix." The man smiled, a predator's gesture. "We prefer to deal locally, Ms. Ríos. Your grandfather had something that belongs to us. Something he called the ghost map. We suggest you find it, or we will be forced to treat this as a hostile inheritance." The message was clear. Jesus's secret was dangerous, and the violence that defined the border had finally reached La Sombra. The next morning, the Southwest Heritage Preservation Group was gone, but their threat lingered like the dust after a passing truck. Elena knew their name was a lie. These were not preservationists. They were cartel enforcers or private security working for the same dark interests. Her first stop was the only institutional authority left in La Sombra, the sheriff's substation. Sheriff Dale Henson was a man in his late 50s, a fixture of the local landscape, his uniform starched, his gaze perpetually tired. Elena laid out the facts about the men and their explicit threat regarding the ghost map. Henson listened, chewing slowly on a piece of gum, his eyes fixed on the distant wall. Ms. Rios, La Sombra is a quiet town. But the quiet doesn't mean there aren't things moving through the shadows. The men you saw? They're likely connected to some large land development firm. Maybe mineral rights, maybe border infrastructure. They use intimidation, sure, but they're legitimate. They referenced a ghost map and threatened my family's land. That sounds like a cartel operation disguised as a preservation group, Elena argued. Henson sighed, finally looking at her. The cartel doesn't announce itself with a group name, Elena. They announce themselves with a body count. And they don't look for old maps. They look for weaknesses in the fence. He offered her a warning, the kind of counsel that felt less like protection and more like resignation. Your grandfather was obsessed with those old, lost land rights. He dug too deep into history. Let the past stay buried, Elena. Sell the ranch, go back to Phoenix, and take the money. Elena left the substation knowing Henson was compromised, indifferent, or genuinely terrified. The law here was just another layer of the desert's hostility. She spent the afternoon with her mother, going through Jesus's old papers, trying to decipher the map. Mama, why did Grandpa call this the ghost map? Anna hesitated, wiping down the kitchen counter nervously. Because it belongs to the ghosts, Mija, the ones who were here before the border. Your grandfather said the land was never just ours. We were caretakers, not owners. Who were the ghosts? The Tohono O'odham people. The ones who lived here for 1,000 years. The land the U.S. government seized from us? It was actually their ancestral land first. Jesus always felt guilty about that. This was the first layer of the historical conflict. The family's claimed land was historically disputed, adding a moral complexity to the legal fight. Later that evening, Elena drove out to the one place in La Sombra that felt completely outside the town's control, the Pinto Mine Complex. The complex was a sprawling, semi-abandoned copper mine that had been the economic engine of the region before it closed a decade ago. It bordered the vast tract of land the Rios family claimed. She needed to understand the maps. Geography. She parked discreetly and walked toward the derelict processing plant. A deep-throated, metallic groan echoed from within the mine shaft. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the shadow of a colossal, rusting conveyor belt. It was the scarred man from the night before, the leader of the preservation group. His name tag, which she hadn't noticed, now read, V. Cross. You shouldn't be here, Ms. Rios, V. Cross said, his voice flat, his stance radiating coiled danger. Elena stood her ground. Trespassing is a misdemeanor. Threatening my family is a felony. We are looking for a historical relic. We believe it holds the key to a crucial piece of infrastructure, something that benefits American trade and security. Your grandfather interfered. What infrastructure? The old Whisper Route, Cross said, his eyes scanning the surrounding canyon walls. A network of tunnels and passages used during the Prohibition era. Jesus Rios knew these tunnels. They run under the seized land, connecting the American side to the Mexican side. That map, the ghost map, shows the key entrance to the route. The second clue, the ghost map, was not a treasure map. It was a map of a massive, historical smuggling route. And you need the Whisper Route now, Elena concluded, realizing the truth. The cartel needs the Whisper Route to move product undetected. The preservation group is a front for an organization that either works with the cartel or is fighting for control of the route. Cross's smile faded. We need the route secured, Ms. Rios. It is a national security risk. Find the map, or we will take the land piece by piece. Starting with your mother's health. Elena retreated, the threat chilling her despite the desert heat. She knew the power of the cartel. The Whisper Route, a historical smuggling channel, was now a geopolitical lifeline for a violent criminal empire. Her grandfather's ghost map was the key to unlocking the border's deepest, most valuable secret. Back at the ranch, Elena spent the next 24 hours in Jesus's study, completely engrossed in the map and her grandfather's historical archives. The map itself was a work of art, drawn on treated animal hide, showing contour lines of the Serpent Canyon. Elena focused on Sombra del Centinela. She cross-referenced the drawing with Jesus's old topographical surveys. The Sentinel was a unique, twin-peaked mountain overlooking the entire Serpent Canyon area. It cast a distinct shadow only at sunset during the winter solstice. She also analyzed the dates scrawled on the map, NOV 20, 1937. She found the corresponding date in one of Jesus's rambling journals. The entry was sparse. They took the land today, but they didn't take the heart. I sealed the entrance. They can never find the gold of the ghosts now. The family land had been seized in the 1950s, but this entry was from 1937. It meant Jesus had sealed the Whisper Route entrance before the government seizure. This was the first historical layer. The Rios family hadn't just lost land. They had used it for something illegal, likely bootlegging during Prohibition, 1920 to 1933, and continued smuggling afterward. The gold mentioned was likely bootleg whiskey or perhaps just a metaphor for the valuable route itself. The map wasn't about the surface. It was about the underworld beneath the surface. Elena decided she needed help, not from the compromised sheriff, but from the Tohono O'odham nation. If the land truly belonged to the ghosts, they might hold the key to the moral and physical landscape. She drove to the edge of the reservation, a vast, arid territory where ancient history met modern independence. She found Anya Saguaro, a Tohono O'odham elder and historian, known for her fierce defense of her people's land rights. Anya's house was a simple structure, but surrounded by flourishing native plants, a small victory against the desert. Elena showed Anya the map and told her about Jesus's obsession with the land and the ghosts. Anya studied the map, her face impassive. She pointed to the symbols Elena hadn't been able to decipher, small, stylized drawings near the Serpent Canyon. These are not Spanish, child. These are O'odham landmarkers. They point to a sacred place, an ancient trading path our people used for centuries. Your grandfather was right. He was a caretaker, but he knew the truth. What is the truth? Anya placed a finger on the central X mark on the map. That mark is where the path was blocked. Your people may have used it for your whiskey, but we used it to survive. That spot, where the old canyon meets the new creek bed, that is the place where the land was divided. Anya revealed the devastating truth that Jesus had kept secret. The U.S. government's seizure of the Rios land in the 1950s was not for a public works project, but to intentionally divide the Tohono O'odham people from their ancestral water sources in the Canon de la Serpiente, which sat squarely on the Rios ranch. The government had used the Rios land dispute as a pretext for a land grab targeting the tribe. The first major twist, Terzco's the Rios family were not the victims of the government. They were the unwitting, secondary beneficiaries of a historical injustice against the indigenous people. Jesus sealed the tunnel not only to protect his smuggling route, but to prevent the government from easily accessing the canyon and cutting off the O'odham water supply. The ghost map is not a map of a route, Anya stated, her eyes sharp. It is a map of a moral debt. Elena suddenly understood her grandfather's guilt and his obsession. He hadn't been fighting to get the land back. He had been fighting to get the justice back. I need to get to the X, Elena said. It's the entrance to the Whisper Route. If the cartel gets there first, they will use it to flood the country with drugs. You will need a guide who knows the silence of the desert, Anya said, looking toward the dusty horizon, and the history of the divided land. Anya introduced Elena to her grandson, Miguel, a former Marine scout who patrolled the reservation's borders, fiercely independent and deeply suspicious of anyone connected to the old land disputes. He will guide you to the Sentinel, Anya said, but he will not fight your family's war. He will only fight for the integrity of the land. Miguel was built like a desert rock formation, hard, unyielding, and watching everything. His mistrust of Elena, a Phoenix lawyer who smelled of city life and old Rios money, was palpable. Your family benefited from the theft, Miguel stated, loading equipment into his stripped-down, all-terrain vehicle. Why should I help you find a smuggling tunnel that will only bring more violence to the border? Because the man who wants that tunnel is V. Cross, Elena replied, showing him the name she had secretly researched. Cross is a high-level private military contractor, possibly tied to international money laundering. He's working with a powerful faction of the Sinaloa cartel to consolidate the border routes. If they get the Whisper route, this whole region will become a war zone. Miguel finally conceded. He was protecting his people, and the cartels were the newest, deadliest invaders. They drove deep into the Serpent Canyon area, the landscape quickly turning raw and unforgiving. They had to reach the Sentinel Peak before sunset to use the shadow to pinpoint the exact location of the X. They arrived just as the sun began its brutal descent. The twin peaks of the Sentinel cast a long, defined shadow across the canyon floor. The Sombra del Centinela, Miguel muttered, comparing the shadow's geometry to the O'odham markers on the ghost map. The shadow converged precisely on a dried-up creek bed, lined with sharp, jagged rocks. This was the El Silencio del Agua, the silence of the water. The entrance is here, Elena confirmed, pointing to the central X where the shadow fell. It must be sealed underneath this debris. They began the arduous work of moving the heavy rocks and sun-baked debris. After 30 minutes, Miguel used a handheld sonar device. "Hollow," he reported. "There's a sealed passage about 6 feet down. Stone and concrete." As they were working, Miguel suddenly froze, holding up a hand. "Quiet. We have company." Down in the canyon basin, 2 large, black SUVs, identical to the one V. Cross had used, appeared. They were driving fast, their headlights cutting through the dusk. They must have been tracking the Rios truck, Miguel cursed, drawing a rifle from his kit. "We have about 90 seconds. We need to open the entrance." "Cross knows the map, means the Whisper route," Elena said, desperate. Miguel ignited a small stick of demolition plastic he carried for emergency road clearance and placed it strategically around the sealed entrance. "The blast will seal the surface and buy us time, but it won't destroy the tunnel," Miguel explained, sprinting toward cover. The black SUVs skidded to a halt. V. Cross and 3 armed men jumped out. "Elena Ríos, the ghost map is not worth your life," Cross shouted. "It's not mine to give," Elena yelled back. Miguel detonated the charge. Crockham. A massive cloud of dust, rock, and concrete shards erupted, forcing the SUVs back and burying the entrance to the Whisper route under a fresh layer of rubble. But the concussion was so violent that a small, secondary fissure opened up in the rock face nearby, a forgotten seam in the canyon wall. The blast opened up a fault line. Miguel shouted, pointing to the dark opening. "The tunnel network is complex. That might be an older, deeper entrance." They didn't hesitate. They ran toward the newly exposed fissure, leaving the chaos and V. Cross's enraged screams behind. They descended into the suffocating darkness of the ancient canyon system. The fissure quickly narrowed into a legitimate, man-made passage. The air inside was thick and cold, smelling strongly of iron, ore, and stale earth. "This tunnel is older than the Whisper route," Miguel whispered, shining his tactical light on the walls. "Look at the tools used. This is pre-20th century, maybe even before the Mexicans or Americans settled here." They moved deeper, navigating low-ceilinged corridors and climbing down rudimentary rope ladders. They found the answer to the tunnel's origin in a small, side chamber. The walls were covered not in graffiti, but in intricate, faded petroglyphs, ancient O'odham carvings. The third clue: the tunnel was part of the original, sacred O'odham trading route Anya had described, a route dating back hundreds of years, running right under the present-day border. "This is the Vault of the Old Man," Miguel said, reading a faint O'odham inscription that matched the phrase on Jesus's map. "The Whisper route didn't start with prohibition. It started with my ancestors." The revelation added a powerful historical weight to their journey. They weren't just searching for a legal secret. They were walking through a sacred, hidden history. They continued deeper, following the cold, downhill slope. After 30 minutes of descent, the path widened dramatically into a vast, cavernous space. The sight that greeted them was terrifying. The cavern was a massive, subterranean warehouse, brightly lit by dozens of high-powered industrial lamps powered by generators. It was a modern, sophisticated logistical hub, and it was operating at full capacity. Dozens of men were working, moving massive, shrink-wrapped bales of narcotics, cocaine, fentanyl, and heroin, onto a small, internal rail system. The noise of the operation, the shouts in Spanish, the rumble of carts, was deafening. This was the true heart of the cartel operation, the La Sombra subterranean hub. They were not just looking for the whisper route. They had stumbled into the main processing and distribution center for the Sinaloa cartel on the Arizona side of the border. This isn't just a route, Elena breathed, pulling Miguel behind a giant stack of empty chemical barrels. This is a forward operating base. It's been running under the Pinto mine, right under the sheriff's nose, for years. Miguel nodded grimly. The ghost map didn't show the route to the entrance. It showed the location of the central hub. Jesus sealed the original entrance to protect this secret, and to protect the O'odham trading vault. The second major twist, Turzco's to the seizure of the Rios land in the 1950s was not primarily to cut off the O'odham water, but to cover up the government's knowledge of this exact subterranean hub. The U.S. government knew the route existed, seized the land under eminent domain, and then leased the surface rights to the Pinto Mining Company to provide a perfect, legal cover for the massive underground operation. Jesus Rios, working the mines in the 1950s, must have discovered the full extent of the operation, not just smuggling, but a partnership between deep-pocketed American corporate interests, the mine owners, and the rising Mexican narcotics operations. The X on the map marked the most vulnerable point, the original, hand-sealed entrance, which could collapse the cavern if detonated. They were trapped in the heart of a vast, corporate-backed criminal enterprise. They needed to find the way out, but more importantly, they needed irrefutable proof of the cartel's location and their American corporate partners. Elena and Miguel pressed themselves against the damp, cold rock wall behind a towering column of empty chemical barrels. The sheer scale of the operation below them was staggering. The cavern was enormous, stretching the equivalent of 3 football fields, meticulously organized despite its hidden location. The noise, the hiss of generators, the distant scraping of metal, and the shouted commands in rapid-fire Spanish indicated a 24/7 operation. This was no mere staging area. It was an industrial logistics center. The air quality alone. Elena murmured, recognizing the sharp, metallic tang of precursor chemicals mixed with the earthy smell of the cavern. They're not just storing finished products here. They're processing the fentanyl. Miguel, a former Marine scout who had seen similar operations abroad, nodded grimly. Look at the rail system. It connects directly to the old Pinto mine shaft that runs north. They bypassed the border patrol by moving the product directly onto the domestic rail lines, disguised as mineral shipments. Their immediate goal was survival, but Elena's lawyer instincts took over. They needed irrefutable evidence. She pulled out her phone. No signal, of course. We need physical proof, Miguel. Something that links the cartel to the corporate cover. Julian Cole, the Pinto mine owners, they need to be named. Miguel pointed across the cavern to a heavily fortified, prefabricated metal office structure situated near the main entrance, the command center. All documents, logs, and communication equipment will be inside there. It's also the highest risk. They'll have a human guard and probably redundant security systems. They spent the next hour moving like ghosts through the maze of stacked narcotics and processing equipment. Elena felt the oppressive fear of the cartel workers themselves, young men, mostly, driven by poverty and supervised by older, menacing enforcers who carried automatic weapons openly. They discovered the massive scale of the historical betrayal. The cavern was so large because the Pinto Mining Company, established after the land seizure, had methodically excavated the tunnels over decades, ostensibly for copper, but primarily to create and expand this secure narcotics hub. The mine served as the perfect, legal facade. Elena's inner conflict. Deepening the legal layer, Elena realized her grandfather's historical obsession wasn't about the property deed anymore. It was about the original sin of the land seizure. The government didn't seize the land for a public road. It was seized to protect a secret criminal enterprise benefiting high-level corporate and perhaps political figures. Her family had been small-time bootleggers, but they were sacrificed to protect this behemoth. As they reached the shadow of the command center, Elena noticed a small, heavily shielded side room labeled Environmental Control. "That's where the generator logs will be kept," she whispered. "Every shipment, every ventilation cycle, every power spike, it's all recorded. It's the forensic fingerprint of the entire operation." They had to disable the security camera pointing at the command center door. Miguel used a precise, low-powered electromagnetic burst from a device he carried, temporarily scrambling the camera feed without alerting the Watcher AI, if one existed. They slipped inside the main office. The room was bustling with electronic equipment and the smell of stale coffee. A massive whiteboard dominated one wall, covered in logistical jargon and names. V. Cross, Logistics. The Bishop, Financing. JC, Oversight. JC, Oversight. Elena frowned. Could that be Julian Cole, the former Nexus CEO who killed himself over the Echo algorithm? Miguel snapped photos of the whiteboard with a secured digital camera. Coincidence? Or is the same money laundering network running both the tech collapse and the border operation? They found the generator logs in the environmental control room. Elena quickly downloaded the data onto a tiny, military-grade thumb drive. The logs confirmed a sporadic, massive energy usage pattern consistent with processing high-volume chemicals over the last 10 years, all shielded under mine maintenance. Just as the download finished, a voice boomed from the cavern floor, amplified by a loudspeaker system. "The intruders are here. Seal the exits. Find the woman and the scout. V. Cross is on the move." The command center was compromised. They had mere seconds to escape before the cartel enforcers, now actively patrolling the hub, found them. Elena and Miguel abandoned the command center, scrambling back into the maze of stacked inventory. They were hunted, and the entire subterranean facility was now on lockdown. They heard the rapid, heavy footsteps of V. Cross and his private security team entering the tunnel system. Cross wasn't relying on the cartel's foot soldiers. He was using his own professional military expertise. They found a temporary, precarious hiding spot behind a giant, rusted water filtration system near the center of the cavern, a dark, damp space offering minimal cover. The proximity forced a confrontation over their divergent goals. "We have the logs," Miguel whispered fiercely. "We need to get out and give them to the O'odham Nation. They can use the data to prove the mine company's corruption and reclaim the land." "No, Miguel," Elena countered. "We have proof of a multi-state narcotics network operating under a corporate cover. We take this to the FBI, or better, the DOJ, and we use the power of the federal government to dismantle the entire operation. This isn't just about the land. It's about the poison. The feds don't care about our land, Elena. They care about their jurisdiction. They'll seize the property, arrest a few low-level bosses, and leave the corporate structure intact." Deepening the character conflict. This conflict was the heart of the story. Elena, the lawyer, believed in the structure of the American system. Miguel, the O'odham scout, had witnessed that system consistently fail his people, prioritizing corporate interests over justice. Their argument was interrupted by the sudden appearance of V. Cross. He approached their hiding spot alone, moving with unnatural silence, the kinetic rifle he carried gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. "I know you're in here, Rios." Cross's voice was low, echoing off the cavern walls. "You have something that belongs to me, the ghost map, and now, my internal logistics data." Cross didn't shoot. He began talking, revealing the third, devastating layer of the conspiracy. The third major twist, Terzco's 3 the real stakeholder. "You think this is about the cartel, Ms. Rios? They are merely contractors. They transport the product. The Southwest Heritage Preservation Group isn't protecting the route for the cartels. We are protecting it for the shareholders." Cross revealed that the Pinto Mine Complex was a shell corporation secretly owned by a massive, offshore hedge fund, Olympus Capital. Olympus Capital, managed by powerful figures in Boston and London, owned the mine, financed the processing equipment, and effectively controlled the supply chain. The cartels were simply the contracted logistics arm. "Your grandfather's map wasn't just valuable because it showed the route," Cross explained, stopping just feet from their hiding spot. "It showed the original, pre-1950s ownership line. If that line is legally re-established, it could nullify the eminent domain seizure and expose the entire Olympus Capital corporate structure that relies on the Pinto mine cover." He paused, aiming his rifle at the gap in the pipes. We don't want the map for smuggling, Rios. We want the map to prevent a $50 billion civil suit. The ghost map is the only physical evidence that the 1950 seizure was fraudulent, orchestrated by Olympus's predecessors to secure the smuggling hub. It's the key to the legal title that secures the whole operation. And the fentanyl? Elena asked, her voice strained. That's just the revenue stream. Cross sneered. The real treasure is the legal immunity afforded by the fake land deed. Cross gave Elena a choice. Give me the map and the drive. I will ensure your family receives a clean, non-traceable 8-figure settlement, and you can leave La Sombra forever. Elena held the drive containing the logs. She had the legal evidence, but Cross had the leverage and the tactical superiority. Suddenly, Miguel acted. He threw a smoke grenade, a high-density flashbang, into the open space. Whoosh! The cavern was instantly filled with choking, blinding white smoke. Miguel grabbed Elena and dragged her deeper into the filtration system. Cross roared, firing wildly into the smoke plume. They climbed vertically through a narrow maintenance conduit, the sounds of gunfire fading below them. The maintenance conduit led them upward, high above the main cavern, into the rarely used original ventilation tunnels of the old mine, tunnels that predated the Pinto Company's modern expansion. They emerged into a small, sealed-off room, a cramped, humid space that felt like a time capsule. This room was where the air vents for the entire mine converged. On the floor, covered by decades of fine copper dust, was a faint inscription carved into the concrete. It was a large R, Jesus Rios's initials. And next to it, the date, 1954. Elena knelt, brushing away the dust. Under the R, she found a loose tile. Beneath the tile was a small, tightly sealed, metal box. Inside the box was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle, a handwritten, detailed ledger belonging to her great-grandfather, Marco Rios. The fourth major twist, Ter's cause for the original sin. Marco Rios's ledger was a confession, detailing the true start of the betrayal. Marco, a bootlegger in the 1930s, had worked with the local O'odham tribe to utilize the ancient trading tunnels. But in 1948, facing bankruptcy and pressure from organized crime, Marco made a catastrophic deal with the predecessors of Olympus Capital. Marco sold the usage rights to the subterranean network to the shadowy corporation, providing them the perfect, secure passage for the rising drug trade. In return, the corporation provided Marco the legal framework and financing to expand his small ranch, legitimizing the family's hold on the disputed O'odham land. When the government seized the land in the 1950s, Marco did not fight. He collaborated. The seizure was a final maneuver to ensure no local, including the O'odham, could challenge the corporate ownership of the vital underground hub. The government received public praise for securing the border. The corporation secured its smuggling base, and the Rios family secured a legitimate, though tainted, ranch. Jesus Rios, as a young man working the Pinto mine in 1954, must have found this ledger and, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, had sealed the original entrance, the X on the map, in a desperate attempt to sever the family's ties to the ongoing crime. The ghost map wasn't just a map of the debt, Elena whispered, holding the brittle paper. It was the key to the original crime. The Rios family were not the victims. We were the founding conspirators in the destruction of this land. Miguel looked at the ledger, his face devoid of surprise. The system always wins, Elena. It just needs a local guide. Elena looked at the ledger, the drive, and the ghost map. She realized the only way to get justice for the O'odham and stop the Olympus operation was to expose the full, 70-year history of corruption, starting with her own family's guilt. She reached for the emergency communication kit Miguel carried, a high-powered satellite communicator designed for deep desert emergencies. We can't just leak this, Elena determined. Cross will bury it, and they'll seize the ranch anyway. We need to turn their own legal framework against them. We need to use the Rios ranch deed. Elena knew that the true power of Olympus Capital lay in the false legal certainty provided by the 1950s eminent domain seizure. If the seizure was proven fraudulent, based on her great-grandfather's sale of subterranean rights, the current deed was invalid. But she couldn't rely on the local Arizona courts, which were likely influenced by the powerful corporate mining interests. She had to trigger a federal jurisdictional crisis. They climbed out of the ventilation shaft near the old, official entrance of the Pinto mine, now controlled by a skeleton crew of Cross's men. Elena initiated the satellite call. She didn't call the FBI. She called a high-level contact at the Department of Justice, DOJ, Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. A contact she had interned with, known for her aggressive prosecution of land fraud cases involving indigenous rights. She spoke quickly, precisely. I am Elena Ríos, calling from La Sombra, Arizona. I have physical and digital evidence, dated 1948 and present day, of a 70-year, corporate-backed narcotics operation running through a massive subterranean hub under the Pinto mine complex. The operation is concealed by a fraudulent 1950s eminent domain land seizure, targeting the ancestral land and water rights of the Tohono O'odham nation. The current operator is Olympus Capital, and they have armed private military contractors on site. She continued, I will provide the ledger and the logistics data, but I need an immediate, dual-pronged federal response. A RICO indictment against Olympus Capital and a civil rights challenge to the 1950s land seizure. You have to hit them on both fronts, or they will bury the evidence. The DOJ contact, stunned by the scale of the claim, agreed to mobilize a rapid response team, focusing on the civil rights violations as the legal bait to secure the crime scene. The final trap. Elena knew the DOJ response would take hours. She had to hold off V. Cross. She used the satellite phone again, calling Sheriff Henson. Sheriff. Elena's voice was calm, authoritative. I am standing near the Pinto mine entrance. I have evidence that Olympus Capital, operating the Pinto mine, is running a massive, high-volume drug processing and smuggling hub directly beneath the town. Their head of security, V. Cross, is a fugitive from a federal investigation and is armed. Henson, caught between his loyalty to the local power structure and the explicit threat of federal intervention, was paralyzed. I can't go in there, Elena. It's private property. It's not private, Elena countered, her voice ringing with the legal authority she had earned. The 1950s seizure was fraudulent. I have my great-grandfather's ledger confirming the illegal sale of subterranean rights before the seizure. That land is legally under dispute, and I, the legal heir to the original claimant, am invoking a temporary civil trespass claim against the Pinto Mine Company. If you fail to investigate my claim now, Sheriff, you are complicit in the felony possession of narcotics on disputed land. Elena had used the archaic civil trespass claim, the very legal weapon Jesus had failed to wield, to force Henson's hand. Henson, terrified of being implicated in a DOJ civil rights/RICO indictment, finally broke. Stay put, Elena, he stammered. I'm coming, but I'm only securing the perimeter. Elena and Miguel hid in the rusted remnants of the mine's old processing machinery. The wait was agonizing. First came V. Cross and his men. They emerged from the mine shaft, covered in dust, furious and determined. She's here. She has the map and the drive. Cross roared, spotting the abandoned satellite phone near the old office. Just as Cross began to organize his men for the final hunt, Sheriff Henson's ancient patrol cruiser arrived, followed by 2 border patrol trucks. Minimal response, but enough to trigger a standoff. Henson stepped out, his face pale, his hands nervously gripping his sidearm. Cross. This area is under temporary civil lockdown. Elena Ríos has filed a formal challenge to the land deed. Stand down. Cross laughed, a harsh, terrifying sound. You brought a knife to a gunfight, Sheriff. This is a corporate asset. You have no jurisdiction. I have the DOJ on speed dial, Cross. Elena shouted, emerging from the shadows, holding the ghost map high in the air. They are mobilizing a civil rights response based on this historical land fraud. Surrender, or you will face federal charges. Cross saw the desperation in her face, but also the resolute legal authority. He knew the threat of a DOJ civil rights probe, which could nullify the foundation of Olympus Capital's empire, was far more devastating than a simple narcotics bust. The climax. Cross raised his kinetic rifle, not at the sheriff, but at Elena. The map dies with you, Ríos. Miguel, utilizing his scout training, fired a single, non-lethal round from his rifle, a high-powered, focus shot aimed not at Cross, but at the main, ancient support pillar of the Pinto mine processing tower above them. Crash. The support pillar, weakened by decades of neglect and the underground processing vibrations, fractured. The entire, massive, rusting steel tower, the symbol of the corporate cover, began to groan and collapse onto the entrance of the mine shaft. Cross hesitated, looking up at the raining steel and debris. That moment of hesitation cost him everything. The arrival of the DOJ's heavily armed rapid response team, complete with black helicopters and federal badges, was the final, definitive sound. The federal jurisdiction had arrived. The DOJ team, briefed on the historical fraud angle, immediately secured Cross and his men. The collapse of the tower effectively sealed the main shaft entrance to the subterranean hub, but the digital evidence had been secured. The aftermath was a massive federal investigation that spanned years. The combination of Marco Rios's ledger, proving the 1948 subterranean rights sale, Jesus Rios's ghost map, identifying the hub, and Elena's digital logs, proving the modern narcotics operation, was the legal atomic bomb. The DOJ secured a massive RICO indictment against Olympus Capital, targeting the corporate heads in Boston and London. The Civil Rights Division, using the ledger as proof of fraudulent intent, successfully nullified the 1950s eminent domain seizure, forcing the land to be returned to the Tohono O'odham nation. The Rios family, despite their great-grandfather's betrayal, was exonerated of current criminal charges. They kept the small, original homestead, now bordered by ancestral land finally restored to its rightful owners. Elena did not return to Phoenix. She opened a small legal practice in La Sombra, focused entirely on border and land rights law, working closely with the O'odham nation. She had traded the pursuit of corporate law for the pursuit of justice rooted in her own history. Sheriff Henson was forced into early retirement, his complicity leading to his quiet downfall. Cross and the cartel logistics chiefs were arrested and faced federal prosecution. One evening, Elena stood with Miguel at the edge of the reclaimed Serpent Canyon land. The setting sun cast long, clean shadows, no longer the shadow of fear, but the shadow of peace. "Your grandfather didn't fight to get the land back," Miguel said, looking out at the vast desert. "He fought to clear his name. He fought to settle the moral debt. And we settled it," Elena replied, "with the map of the ghosts." She smiled, looking at the harsh, beautiful desert. The American dream in La Sombra wasn't about ownership or wealth. It was about the complex, often painful, process of historical reckoning. The land had finally spoken, and the ghost of the border had been laid to rest.